During this period of time, unsurprisingly, we're going to talk about the Postman API platform, as has probably been a topic of many other conversations. Specifically, though, what we're going to address is the economic benefits that you could see through adopting Postman, and that many of our current customers and partners are observing. So before we get in, a little bit about me, and I'm consider myself to be pretty honest and also like to get out in front of things. So two quick things. One, Ryan Reynolds, yes, that is my name. Unfortunately for me, just as much as you, I'm not the actor. So if you'd like to drop off, no hard feelings, not in my Deadpool suit today. Second thing, that picture is 13 years old, but since I'm on video, I figure no harm, no foul there either. So at Postman, I am the manager of our enterprise sales team. I've been in developer tooling for nearly a decade now, and been at Postman for about 2 years. So I have the absolute luxury of speaking with hundreds, if not thousands, of our users as well as customers as they work towards the ideal state of their API strategy, their struggles, in various metrics that they need to hit from a organization-wide perspective. So a very brief agenda of what we'll cover today. First, we'll take a little walk down memory lane, go over the traditional relationship between technology and end users over really about the past 60, 70 years. Then we'll talk about why people are using Postman today from an individual standpoint and just general usage. Then we'll go into how enterprises are adopting Postman and why. Then how they're formalizing that adoption through deploying our enterprise solution. And then finally, why they're doing it in terms of economic benefit in ROI. So let's start with technology and end users and talk a little bit about how this relationship has evolved over time. So I will try to watch the chat and Slido, but I'll just give this about 10 seconds. Little riddle, what weighs 54,000 pounds, is 1,800 square feet, and uses 150 kilowatts of electricity? Ian, you can cue up the Jeopardy music if you have it available. All right, so if you guessed the 2022 Tesla Cybertruck Camping Edition, you would unfortunately be incorrect. It's the 1945 ENIAC, AKA the giant brain. And this is a photo of it here. It's a massive machine. So the ENIAC, of course, stands for Electronic Numerical Integrator and Computer. It was created by two individuals, John Mauchly and J. Presper Eckert. But what this was the world's first programmable general purpose digital computer. Interesting if you still have that picture in your mind of what this machine was. Massive installation. It took 6 people to program a certain function into it, and it took them about 2 weeks to do so. Now, of course, once that was programmed, then it could execute this in rapid fashion, but just amazing that initial lift that was required. And like many of these, very early on technology advancements and just large technological implementations, it was primarily government. And in 1945, it was government meant military. So this was used by the US Army to calculate artillery firing tables. And specifically, the benefit here was it was able to calculate those firing tables in 30 seconds. It took a human 20 hours to do so. So 1 machine hour of the ENIAC was 2,400 human hours. It's pretty incredible to think about. So why are we talking about a massive supercomputer from the 40s? Well, a couple of reasons. One, it's an undeniable advancement in technology. And like I just said, 1 machine hour to 2,400 human hours, huge gain in productivity. And those types of gains are almost lost on us now with everything being at our fingertips. But this also gives a dramatic, I'd say the most dramatic baseline potentially for the connection between technology and the end user. You have these 6 people spending weeks programming this machine inside a laboratory. And then you have people on the battlefield that are actually going to use the calculations that this thing is spitting out. And I would argue, and at this point in the presentation, you would probably argue right back, but this really started the shift towards consumer grade applications. So how could that be true? Well, let's do another riddle. What weighs 17,000 pounds, is 382 square feet, and uses 125 kilowatts of electricity? Some of you might have caught on. If you guessed this time the 2022 Tesla Cybertruck camping, you are wrong again. It's a 1951 UNIVAC one. So why do I keep talking about these old computers, right? Well, the UNIVAC is the Universal Automatic Computer. And if you recall, John Mauchly and J. Presper Eckert also created the ENIAC, same guys. So instead of going down this government and military route, they spun up their own company and begun to build machines like this. So this was the first US-made digital computer for robotic business application. Instead of 6 people, this took 1 controller. And it was really famous for predicting the result of the 1952 presidential election. This was the Eisenhower election. And every poll, including what was and really still is the standard, Gallup, no one had Eisenhower winning. He ended up winning in what many would call a landslide, but more importantly, the UNIVAC predicted it within 3.5%. So incredible. Why are we talking about this? Well, again, undeniable in advancement in technology and huge gain in productivity. Now you have one person with the ability to make these calculations. It's not taking 2 weeks to punch in a program or process into it anymore. And we're also beginning to see the split. This technology isn't just for military applications anymore. That became evident in 1955 when GE purchased a UNIVAC. And it was the first company to purchase a computer for computing. Pretty novel concept there. But the reason they purchased it was to automate a bunch of things, namely payroll and budget analysis. Funny, it didn't work at first, and there were problems with like the tubes inside of the machine, but eventually they got it figured out, and GE successfully used this for business purposes. Right? So let's fast forward a few years, maintaining that idea of getting a business user behind the wheel of technology. And we talk about 1979, VisiCorp released the VisiCalc for the Apple II. VisiCalc was the first electronic spreadsheet program. So, today's Excel, Google Sheets, that was VisiCalc. And this is really what transformed the personal computer from, if anyone saw Waz's a great keynote yesterday with Kin Lane, our chief evangelist. I mean, he was talking a lot about the early days, going to these computer clubs, and that was very much the hobbyist, although Apple turned into something way different than that. It wasn't the direct business application. That's not what computers were. VisiCalc changed that. It's also what prompted IBM to release their PC in 1981. And if you think about it, what we've been discussing is, engineers, really electrical engineers, configuring this giant machine inside of a lockdown laboratory for people using in the battlefield. Now you have someone in accounting or payroll sitting at their desk with a personal computer doing this work for their company. And this is just a quick quote. This hangs in the halls of Harvard Business School, and it credits the creator of VisiCalc for forever changing how people use computers in business. So you might be asking yourself, am I at the right conference? You are. And is this about Postman? I promise it is. So let's talk about web APIs. So APIs themselves have been around for almost as long as computing, right? But when we talk about APIs today, and when many people hear APIs, they're really thinking of web APIs. And these began to take shape and form in the early 2000s. We saw the 3 main players, Salesforce, eBay, and Amazon. And the reason they were leveraging APIs, it was for, as you can guess, commerce, grow the bottom line, and extend their reach, right? but still it was this very like mystical thing that was happening behind the wizard's curtain, and it was purely focused on commercial transactions. In the mid 2000s, for better or worse, this is when we saw the eruption of social platforms and social medias. So Flickr, Facebook, Twitter, no explanation needed there probably, but they've changed the way that we interact with each other, with various administrations inside of all of our societies. It's really changed the way that we share, document, and interact in our everyday life. It's also one of the first areas where this heavy reliance on community, both from a usage standpoint as well as a development standpoint, started to take hold. So when we look at what was going on from a business sense during the mid 2000s, there's some interesting takeaways. So this is when Amazon released S3 and EC2. This fundamentally changed how businesses operated, how they could be created, how they could grow, how they could create new products. I mean, having this compute power at your fingertips with very little setup completely changed what was possible. Right? In 2007, the types of applications that we interacted with and the breadth of applications that we interacted with changed as well. Some of you may know what I'm onto, but 2007, the iPhone came out, right? So we saw Twilio, Google Maps, Instagram, Foursquare. This created an entirely new segment of applications, a new way for end users to interact with these applications. And although, for example, myself, I'm not thinking that, oh, this is all driven by APIs, right? It's not really the point. We're closer to them than we ever had been before. We're not just Amazon pumping out e-commerce or eBay. It's actually an end user interacting with these devices to enjoy our lives, to share things with others. So a big shift. And yeah, wasn't this whole thing about end users? It absolutely is. And I kind of just explained it, but the traditional definition of who is an end user of technology in general has really changed. And we'll dive into this in specific regard to Postman in a bit. But what you're able to do with technology, you're not required to be this electrical engineer or an engineer in general anymore. So are you at the right conference? You are. Postman sure is. So usage of Postman. Many of you are probably familiar with this if you're a Postman user yourself, or maybe you know some people who are leveraging Postman. So the core reason that anyone is interacting with Postman is because APIs inherently are not easy to use, right? And the first place people typically go is, let me find the documentation. How do I work with this? The problem there is the documentation might not exist. It's probably not up to date, and it may not even be accurate in terms of everything you need in order to interact with that API. One of those big components is, how do I authenticate into that API? If you're unable to do that, you're essentially dead in the water. Another piece, and really one of the reasons that Postman exists, is the traditional method of exploring the surface area and figuring out how to interact with an API through a combination of curl and code. This is cumbersome, duplicative, and when we think back to who our end users are, sure, there are a number of people and backend engineers, full stack developers. I mean, there's a lot of familiarity and capability using curl there, but a business user really isn't going to dive in and understand how to explore an API with that. What's compounding this is the number of APIs that we have to deal with. So if you look at any organization, you have your own APIs that you're creating, you have external APIs that you're interacting with or building into your product, and then you have to deal with vendor APIs too for your own purposes. What's happening along with that is the more integrations you're building, the more products that you're releasing, the surface area of what you need to test now continues to increase. And traditionally, there wasn't a great way to do that. Finally, this is a little tongue in cheek, but I think everyone could agree with me. I'm not being asked to do anything less. I'm being asked to do more in the same amount of time. So the way to do that is figure out how I can be more efficient in my processes Because on the back end, that's productivity, right? So why a team uses Postman, a team being a group of people working towards a common objective. And this could be small or large, right? Largely the same reasons as why an individual would, but at more of a macro level. So if I'm interacting with my team, we don't, if we're not using Postman, have a centralized and version repository of APIs. I don't know where the documentation is. I don't know where various workflows exist. I have to build everything from scratch. The problem with that is in many companies, AKA almost every company I speak with, current knowledge around where this information exists is completely siloed. So you might have, let's just say, specs sitting inside of Confluence. You might have them in Google Docs. You might have them in Microsoft Word Docs, Notepad. Same thing exists with documentation. Or you have Larry, who's been here for 10 years and was involved with the creation of these items. So of course he knows it, right? So then you have tribal knowledge. What does that bleed into? Well, it's incredibly hard to onboard any new teammates or new teams onto these APIs because there's no centralized information. What happens if Larry's out of the office, or what happens if I don't have access to this specific area inside of Confluence that contains the documentation? It's almost impossible to do. So same thing, no one's being asked to do any less. We need to be efficient. We need to be productive. It helps everyone. So this is something that is a difficult concept at first for some. When we talk about consumers, a lot of people immediately think, okay, public consumption of APIs, absolutely. But you also have internal consumers, right? Just how you would refer to a specific business unit inside of your company as a customer. They're also potentially a consumer of your API. So why does a consumer want to use Postman? Very similar to what we've been talking about. If I'm a consumer and you supply your documentation to me inside of a Postman collection or public workspace, whatever the case may be, I have a pretty high degree of confidence that it's accurate, up to date, and is going to contain everything that I need to get me 85, 90% of the way there to have a meaningful interaction with the API. I have trust in that Postman collection because I use it every day myself. And that goes to this third bullet point. The fact of the matter is many people, aka millions of people, are already using Postman today, and we'll dive into this in a bit, but meet your users where they already are. What I hear all the time is, oh yeah, I get my documentation or I pull the spec out of XYZ area. What they then do is take that and have to transform it into a Postman collection because that's the context that they're used to working with. So why create that extra step? Give them the collection, give them the documentation, whatever the case may be, do it in the context that they're familiar with. And a quick note here, just related to public workspaces that I brought up. This is something relatively new in Postman's life and something we're really excited about. Having this direct feedback loop from your consumers, whether they're internal or external, to the producer, that API, improves the entire entire experience. So it's not just that you want to look and say, oh, people are using this is great, or people are downloading my documentation. That doesn't really show what's coming out at the back end. The ability for people to fork, comment, provide potentially constructive criticism, that's what you need in order to improve the API. You can't just look at it in a silo or a bubble. So widespread adoption. Everyone's using Postman. This is what I mentioned earlier. So yes, and this is also the topic that we've been talking about regarding end users. End users are no more just engineers in terms of an API footprint. They're touching every part of your organization, more departments than have ever been involved. And if we look at this data on the right, this pie chart represents, this is real data. I obviously won't tell you who it is, but this is I would call it average organization that uses Postman. It's fairly significant, but again, average, it's not an outlier. And there's nothing bizarre about this. We see the usual players, backend developers, full stack developers, and varying comfort of level with APIs, they're pretty comfortable. Then we look down, sales engineer and support engineer. That's over 20% of this total usage of Postman within this company. I would argue that the backend and full stack developers have a higher degree of comfort with these APIs than a sales engineer and support engineer. Nothing against anyone involved there, just support engineers and sales engineers have other things as part of their core job responsibility than understanding APIs and working with them, right? So anywhere we have the opportunity to make that easier and more efficient and more productive is going to benefit the overall organization. So, okay, a bunch of people are using it. Is it significant? Absolutely. So this data on the right, this is also not an outlier. It's actually the same company from the data before that I showed. But Postman is a core part of many people's workday. It's not just that they're hopping in, hopping out. We see continued and scaled usage month over month, and not just in this graph, in general, year over year. Peak November, 5,389 hours. This is based on session time that users spent in Postman. That's an aggregate number. It's an incredible amount of time. When we look at it in an average user, they're spending almost a full business day. 5% of their month is spent inside of the tool. It's an extremely significant amount of time. So is it common? And this is what I brought up earlier. Yeah, it is. So Postman has 14 million registered users. That means people who have created an account with us, and over 50 million downloads. So there's no requirement to create an account. That means that the footprint is somewhere between 14 and 50 million, right? The question you're probably asking, how did I have that data? Well, we have telemetry into our registered users based on their email address. So I can look up a specific company, and that's how I produce the data for you today. Over 500,000 organizations have employees using Postman. 98% of the Fortune 500 have similar data to what I just showed you. They're already standardized from a end user perspective. We'll talk about that in a moment. And then just a quick offer, if you want this data for your company, happy to provide it, ryan@postman.com. So capturing the value. Italicized and underlined here, formally. Why do I have that? Because the data I already showed you, end users have already adopted and standardized on this. Now it's time for these organizations to catch up and bake it into their current process, their current controls and systems. End users are going to be using it regardless. Add control, structure, pump in that productivity and efficiency that we've been talking about. So from a productivity standpoint, it's the collaboration that I'm sure you've heard, not only during my presentation, but during other sessions at Postman. Without that centralized repository of this information, you're going to continue to have siloed and tribal knowledge about where this exists. It's not a beneficial interaction or setup for your company. Allow Postman to integrate and bring them into the fold with your other products that you have. I mean, Postman has a number of integrations from even a collaboration standpoint, Teams, Slack, monitoring, a bunch of stuff. This whole idea behind having that central repo and what we talked about earlier, reduce the friction for developers to onboard. Give them an area to go, get them productive more quickly, and then your production is increased, and the quality of that production will also be increased. And then finally, we'll talk about this in just a minute, 5,300 hours. What was happening during that 5,300 hours? Get an idea of where that time is being spent. And if you're not measuring it, you can't manage it, right? So in order to be able to wrap your arms around it, first step is identifying where it is. The other component here that is typically pretty important is security. So don't need to harp on anyone to say that APIs are usually the key to your castle. At its core, it's database access, right? So you have people using Postman for 5,300 hours. That's a significant amount of time. There's a lot of data being passed there. Bring it in to the same process that you have your other critical tooling that's being used to that volume and with this type of sensitive data. Control who's accessing these accounts via skim, right? When someone wants to join the team, add them. When they leave the company, automatically removed. Set up role-based access control at a granular level, like every other tool that's used in this fashion. And then finally, we allow you to scan your collections in Postman footprint to identify if anything has accidentally made it outside of what your formal controls are. Find that before it's an issue. So how would you adopt Postman? First step, figure out who these users are and where they are. So like many other tools, Postman is rolling out domain capture. That will allow you to surface these users. Step 2 would be, let's go talk to those users, figuring out how they're using Postman, what their goals are, and how they're accomplishing those goals with the tool. Then we can start mapping and creating these workspaces for these different groups inside of your organization. The way that we'll map those is back to your original organizational construct of groups that you might have sitting in your IDP, and that's something Abhinav also talked about on the keynote, user groups. So rubber hits the road. How do you kick this off if you've decided to do so? Well, we can transfer these existing users, and that's really the big part here. Everyone's using Postman anyways. All we're doing is putting them into a more constructive and controlled environment. So flick the switch essentially with our help from our sales, solutions engineering, and customer success team to get everyone onto the enterprise platform. Your users will automatically find themselves in a comfortable and shared space with their team. And then we can start working on what are the success criteria that we need to identify, and how do we segment that down team by team and group by group, and how do we want to roll out training to them. Then, of course, as you would probably expect, a typical QBR or whatever frequency is your preference type of activity where we sit down, we look at how your organization's API health is trending, how productivity is going, and what product innovation looks like. So what's the end result of this? What can you expect? Well, about a year ago, we contracted the Enterprise Strategy Group, ESG, to do a third-party study with a lot of our current customers to have a validated opinion on what the ROI truly is and what sort of results they were seeing. So the things that we spoke about today are obvious. I mean, they identified that there was a significant improvement in productivity, communication across the team, because that doesn't exist if you're not inside of a shared context and collaborative space. And then finally, of course, quality enhancements, because you're able to do this work with more context as you're building it, via from the design standpoint or from a testing standpoint. Biggest takeaway here is the models that they put together estimate that the adoption of Postman from an org-wide perspective would provide savings that are 26 to 44 times the cost of the platform itself. Significant ROI, and I won't go through all these things on the right-hand side, but interesting topics to look at. So how does this actually come out on the back end? What does this look like? Okay, 4 times increase in speed, great. This is also real data. And what we did about a year ago is we rolled out to a significant portion of users within a large company that has a focus on APIs. We didn't roll out to all those users though, so we had a control group of free users and then our paid teams that were collaborating and centralizing their information inside of a source of truth. The free users spent 2.45 hours a week inside of the tool. The paid users spent 1.34 hours per week. So your first question is that a good thing? Because it sounds like they're not using the tool. It's a great thing, because that reduction in time, which is 1 hour per week per user, is due to having that shared space and central repo, just like you have for everything else code related within your company. So, Important from that perspective, because an hour a week is a lot, but if you magnify this over a couple of thousand users, that number quickly becomes extremely large. And then finally, I brought this up earlier, and I realized that this is not the best screenshot, but I wanted to show you something to get the ideas going here. Can you measure it? Absolutely. Right now, that those 5,300 hours I showed you, that is a organization that is not working with us from an enterprise perspective. They don't have visibility into that. The work is being done though. If they were to consolidate everything into a single account, they would start to be able to answer questions that almost every company cannot, right? So here, this is just one example of a report that we provide in our analytics suite. It's a top-down view on all of your API development. So you can see how many APIs have what percentage of test coverage. And this is not real data. This is dummy data. It's us in a demo environment. So that's why the information isn't super impressive. But API versions with test coverage, with documentation, and then down below, right? Here's a real-world example. API versions by schema type. So if you had an organizational move to, hey, we're standardizing on OpenAPI 3.0, for example, right? How are you going to identify what APIs are 2.0, at what speed you're moving them to 3.0, and when are you done? Most organizations don't even know how many APIs they're working with in general, let alone what schema type they're using. So this is just a great real world example with fake data around how you could begin to really measure this. And again, if you're not managing something, it's impossible to measure it. You have no idea what these numbers are. How are you going to speak to them or set specific metrics for goals? So if you're interested in chatting more about this, like I said, I'd be happy to provide data specific to your organization or just have a general conversation with you. Again, shoot me an email, ryan@postman.com, LinkedIn, linkedin.com/in/Postman Platform. If you'd like to download that third-party study, the ESG report, you can do so at that link. I just want to thank everyone for attending Galaxy. I hope you had a great time. Sorry we went a little over on this session, but I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope it was potentially beneficial or thought-inspiring.
Perfect. Awesome. Thank you, Ryan. So we'll keep open for another 3 minutes or so for some quick questions. Anybody who has some questions around value proposition, being able to drive that value and usage. I don't know about the people who have joined, but I think when you first start to see the average of usage across your organization, how expansive that is, I think that would probably be surprising to most people seeing here. Pete says that he was very inspired by needing to get that truck. If you're a Tesla fan, some people here are big Tesla fans, some are bitter and disappointed in their backing of Tesla. So I won't harp on that too much more. Yeah, it looks like I'm not seeing any questions necessarily, so that must mean, Ryan, that you hammered the point home pretty well. Thank you for sharing, everyone, for joining in. I'll be popping over to the booth. Ryan, would love it if you join me if anybody else has additional questions related to this topic or in just being in the post and fold. Nasir says, great stuff, Ryan. Thank you, Nasir. I know that he worked hard on it. I did many revisions of his slides, so I'll take some credit myself. But anyways, for those who are sticking with us, thank you guys for staying all the way through. In the meantime, take care and enjoy the rest of Galaxy.